Hi, everybody. Hi, hackers. My name's Abby. I'm the head of community at Radicle, and I'm joined here today with Cloudhead, one of the co-founders of Radicle and lead of the All Clients team. And we're here to give you a quick presentation on Radicle, what it is, why it's cool, and give you a demo of one of our latest feature releases, the Radicle CLI. So hopefully you all can get hacking on the Radicle Network. So to start, I want to just give a quick intro on Radicle for those who aren't familiar. So Radicle is a lot of things. Radicle project is building secure and uncensorable code infrastructure, collective code governance, and new ways to earn money for open source. Today, we're going to be focusing on the first value proposition that Radicle offers, which is sovereign code infrastructure. So basically, Radicle enables developers to securely collaborate on software over a peer-to-peer network built on Git. So this is cool for a lot of reasons. At the core of Radicle, behind all of our Ethereum features as well is a really powerful peer-to-peer network that's powered by seed nodes that operate a gossip protocol that's built on top of Git. So what this does is it replaces the centralized forge. It provides an alternative for the centralized forge model that we see in our day-to-day use of GitHub and GitLab. So it allows us to collaborate on software without relying on central servers, which allows us to, collaborate and host code that is uncensorable and untakedownable and outside of any platform. So the cool thing that we'll be showing today is that you can actually do all of this from your command line from the CLI. So unlike centralized forges where you have to rely on UIs or web experiences, Radicle is something that you can interact with and publish to via the command line, making this a more local first experience. And then finally, the power of Radicle is that allows you to own your identity. It allows you to have a self-sovereign developer identity that is platform agnostic. It's not defined by email addresses. It's defined by cryptographic key pairs. So the cool part about Radicle identities, which you'll be learning about how to create today, is that you can actually link them to your Ethereum identity via ENS and create a global developer identity that's based in your local environment, the keys that you use to publish and collaborate on code repositories via Git, and also your identity in the Ethereum world. So I think that this is a really cool demo that we'll have today. It'll walk through how to get started on the Radicle network with an identity and how to collaborate and publish code to the network. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Cloudhead, who built and designed the CLI, and he'll give us a run through of the product and give us a demo of the CLI as a whole.
Hey, what's up? So let's get started with the CLI. So first thing is you're going to want to head up to radicle.network and click on get started. And then on here, you have some install instructions. If you want to build from source, if you already have Rust installed, then that could be the easiest. Otherwise, on macOS or Homebrew, we have also a package which only works on x86 64 right now. So if you're on the M1s, you have to know what you're doing. So I'm going to basically follow this guide more or less, but I'm going to show you in the CLI so that you can see this whole thing happening live. So I'm just going to switch over. All right. So, okay. So here I'm in a, I'm just in a folder for the conference, and I have the Radicle CLI installed, and basically it's a set of tools that all start with Rad, including Rad itself. So if I enter this, I can see a bunch of commands, and it also tells me, okay, it looks like it's the first time you're using Radicle. Start with rad auth to authenticate. So I'm going to do that. Do rad auth, and it's going to ask me to create an identity. And so these identities are completely local. So this is not publishing anything on the network. This is just creating something locally. So I'm going to put a username. I'm going to enter a passphrase, which is to protect my key pair that is being created. And so it's telling me it's creating an ed key pair, and this is what we call the Radicle key pair. It's SSH compatible, so you can also use it to log in and do things like that if you want. And with recent versions of Git, it's also possible to sign commits with this key pair, so it's quite handy. There's a few things you're going to need, like SSH agent, but the tool will tell you if you're missing something. And then what this tells me is, so the most important thing is that I have a peer ID, and this it tells me it identifies my device. So this physical device I'm running on is identified by this ID, and this ID is really just an encoded public key. And then I have a URN, which is another ID which identifies me as a user, so across devices, right? Today we're mainly going to focus on the peer ID because I have only one device, so there's really not so much use for the URN at the moment. If I do rad self, I can see who I am, essentially. So name, URN, peer ID, and then here you can see the keys in SSH format, which are also handy for authentication. And so the next thing it's telling me as a hint is run Rad Inits from a Git repository. So I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to create a new Git repository because for the demo, I think it makes sense. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create a Web3Con repository. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do git init. I'm going to add a file, Web3Con, and I'm going to add it. And sorry, I have the G is Git. I just have it aliased in muscle memory. So let's just say initial commit. All right. So I have this Git repository, and we have one commit in it. It's essential to have at least one commit for a Radicle project to be created. And so the next thing we're going to do is called Rad Inits, which will initialize a Radicle project. And so just like user identities, Radicle projects have identities that are sovereign, that are portable and offline first. So this is important because a Git repository on its own doesn't really have an identity. You can't compare two repositories unless you just compare the files. But what Radicle is going to do here is it's going to create a unique identity for this project with some metadata. So I'm going to type rad init, name Web3Con, that's fine. Description, Web3Con demo, and then default branch. So whatever branch you're on is going to be set here, but you can of course change this to whatever you want. So one thing it's asking here is whether you want your Radicle signing key to be configured in the checkout. And this is really cool because, so I'm going to say yes. And what this is going to do is it's going to configure it as a commit signing key. Now, if you already have a commit signing key and you don't want to do this, you can always say no. But if you don't, I would highly recommend it. So it's telling me now, okay, your project ID is na. You can do rad dot to show it from inside the project, indeed, and then you can publish with rad push. So far, everything we've been doing has been offline. One thing I wanted to show with this signing key is how it works. So what we do is essentially only in the local repository, we configure a few things. Here we configure the signing key, so which means that if you're signing commits in here, it'll use your Radicle key. And we're using the SSH format, which it's a bit confusing because it says GPG format SSH, so essentially it's not using GPG for signing. It's using SSH. And this is nice because the SSH keys are much smaller, and SSH is just better than GPG in a lot of ways. Let's give this a try, actually. So I'm going to edit the README, and I'll just duplicate this and I will commit, and I'm going to say, well, actually, I can just, yeah, I'm just going to, so this is commit. I can commit, and now I'm going to git log show signatures, and you'll see that the original commit I did was with my sort of default key on this machine. It's a good signature, but it's red because it's not trusted. Whereas this second commit I did here, same same message, but essentially it matched what they call a principal, which is just a key that is recognized and trusted. And you can see my peer ID here, and then the SH key. And so this is my Radicle peer ID. And the reason this key is trusted is simply because it is in a file called git signers, which is by default not checked into the repository. So essentially, we add it for you in git ignores, but you can also check it in if you want to have a key list in your repo and sort of verify that all signatures have been made by trusted keys. So now that we have all of this, I'm going to publish the project to the network. And there's a couple of ways to do this, but the simplest is via rad push. And one thing you'll notice is that if I do git remote, there's actually a rad remote that was created when I initted the project. And this is actually a remote that lives on the device, on my local device. So it's actually a remote that is in another repository on the machine that sort of contains all of the Radicle state. We call it the monorepo because it has all Radicle repositories namespaced under a single Git repository. And so when I push, if I just do a git push rad, this will push from my working copy here into that monorepo. But still, this is not publishing to the network. I can actually do this, and you'll see it's instantaneous because it's completely offline or local. If I do rad push, however, what happens is that it's going to do a git push rad, but it's also going to synchronize the changes to a remote seed node. And currently we have 3 seed nodes deployed ourselves. So the Radicle project has deployed a couple of seed nodes, but anyone can deploy a seed node and use it to push and pull from and collaborate with. So since it's the first time I'm pushing, it's going to ask me, so you see here, it does a git push rad, but this is already done. And the next thing is, since it's the first time I'm pushing or publishing to the network, it's asking me where I want to publish. And I have 3 options here. These are the kind of default seed nodes that are configured. But again, you can overwrite this and publish to whatever seed node you want. All right, so here we can see that the project was pushed, and then it synchronized to the seed node that I selected. So you see here, syncing project to pine.radicle.garden. And then it tells us that the project is available on the web for browsing. There's a few different URLs that I'll explain. And then one important thing is it tells us also that the seed configuration, so the fact that I selected Pine, was saved in my local git config. And you can see this if you do git config rad.seed, it'll tell you Pine. And so this is just stored inside of Git itself right here. All right, and it's also telling us that if we want to override that, so we want to sync to a different node, we can just pass the seed argument to push or to sync or to whatever command that takes that. It also tells us how to change it more permanently. So every time you are interacting with a project on Radicle, there's going to be a seed node that is implied, essentially. And if there is none, it'll ask you which one you want to push to, or it'll ask you to select one. And so if we do rad push help, we'll see here, that you can pass a seed. And so this would basically look like this. Let's say I wanted to push to a different node. I would do something like this, for example. So just the host name. Cool. So now that we've done this, it might be a good idea to check out what was published through one of these URLs. So just to kind of explain this briefly, the two web URLs, the first one is sort of the canonical URL for the project. So you'll see you have at Radicle Network seeds, the seed node, and then the project ID, the project URL. And then the second one is the same thing, but it also has my peer ID added to it, which means that this second URL is kind of my own source tree of this project, whereas the top one is sort of the canonical one. And if you are the maintainer of the project and you're the sole maintainer, then these two will point to the same thing. But if you're not, the second one will, the first one will probably not be showed actually. So let's check this out on the app. So I'm just going to copy this and switch screens. Give me a second. Okay. All right. So here I am in the web interface, and you'll see a couple of things you can recognize. You'll see the project ID here, name of the project, the README that we updated. You'll see that this data is fetched directly from pine.radicle.garden. We can see the commits, initial and second commit. We'll see our branch. And then here, there's something that is pretty unique to Radicle. It's called the Peer Selector. And it's a little bit equivalent to on GitHub, the forks. So here you can see the only peer is myself with my peer ID here, and it's telling me I'm a delegate. Delegate means sort of a trustee of the project that can sign on behalf of the project. And I'm a delegate because I created the project, so I'm automatically a delegate as a creator, but you can add more delegates to a project later. Now, if I click on this, I'm going to see the same thing, but actually in terms of the commit and everything, but I will have this peer selected as the current peer. And here I will also see that I'm browsing a specific view of the project or a specific source tree. So when you have people you're collaborating with, you will have them show up in here, and you'll be able to browse their individual forks, basically. One other thing to keep note of is there's two ways to clone a project. There's the kind of standard Git way, which you can just do Git clone and this URL, and you'll get a clone of the source code. But you will not get a clone of the project identity because the project identity is not part of the source code. It's part of Git, but it's not part of the sort of source code, like working copy source code. If you want to actually clone it via Radicle and get like all of the metadata, then you would do Rad Clone. And we can actually try this out. I'm going to copy this and go back to the terminal. And here we go. So let's say I was in a different folder here. So here I have the one I created, but let's create a clone folder and go in here, and then paste this command, rad clone, I don't know. And these URLs basically incorporate the seeds and the project IDs, essentially the project ID without the rad kit prefix. And so if I enter this, you'll see basically something very similar to when we did a Rad Init. It's going to, well, first it's going to sync everything, but then it's going to initialize a checkout. It's going to ask me again if I want to configure my sign-in key on this checkout, and then it's done. And then I can go into Web3Con here, and we'll see that it's just the same thing as we had previously. So yeah, that's pretty much it for at least the kind of push and clone flow. If you want to kind of explore the other commands, you can just type rad and look at the other stuff we have. So for example, we can list our projects with radls, so we can see this one project that we created. We can also look at our tracking graph, which I'm not going to explain in depth right now, but what it is basically is the peers that you know about around a certain project. So here, I only know about myself. So I see myself here. I see that it's me and that I'm a delegate of the project, and I see my my latest commit. You can manage these with track and untrack, but again, not going to go super in depth. Yeah, and then as Abbey said, we have some cool features around ENS also, which so the ENS stuff, I also I'm not ready to show it right now because I would have to get my ledger out and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, yeah, it lets you associate an ENS name with your local Radicle identity. So you can see if we go on rad self and we actually do rad inspect on this URN, which is our self, you can see the payload here, which is a JSON document, and right now the only metadata really is that is my name, but this is extensible, so you can add other sections like this. So this is kind of like a JSON schema type thing, which tells you, okay, this section is kind of the canonical person v1 payload, which just has a name in it. And this can be extended with other things, and that's how we support ENS. It's by extending this with your ENS name, and then of course these updates to the identity are all signed with your key, so they're secure. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for listening.